Joseph, the miner Rio Tinto, we've had numbers from them today. They've promised in the past to be more cash generative. Is there any sign that that's happening?
Yeah, you would like that from miners, because in the last few years they've pretty much burned every dollar of cash, or almost, that shareholders have given them in terms of not controlling costs and spending huge on big capital projects. That is kind of behind Rio quite a bit. They announced today operating cash flow in the first half of this year of about $8.5 billion, which is quite a big amount. And that's been supported by a reduction in operating costs of about $3 billion over the last 2 years. And it's really throttled its capex. It's coming in about $9 billion this year, which sounds like a lot, but it used to be a lot more than that 2 or 3 years ago.
So good news on the cash front, it's generating a lot more than it was, but where does that leave the operations? Is it still able to expand its production if it sees the demand for that iron ore?
Well, I mean, this is it, because as well as that cost-saving story, which is definitely there and is quite an astonishing success given the history of miners, at the same time, Rio is the second biggest producer of iron ore in the world, and iron ore is a good 9/10 of earnings and was about almost $8 billion of that operating cash flow last year. So iron ore is the cash machine for Rio, and it's also a bit of a gorilla because the volume of production is huge. It produced 140 million tonnes in those first 6 months.
Is the demand for all of that production? We hear from the Chinese property market, for example, that things aren't going too well there. Is there a home for all this, or will this extra production just put pressure on prices?
I mean, the spot price has wobbled quite a bit. It's fallen like a fifth or so in the first half of this year. The good news for Rio is that its margins are pretty good for the industry. They're still about 66% on an EBITDA basis. And the producers who get hurt the most by a further drop in prices, if, for example, Chinese property enters into a real smash, then it's Chinese producers and producers in quite untraditional parts of the world, such as Iran and Indonesia. Rio controls mines in Australia, which are very sort of low cost and have sort of good transport links.
Well, pain on the way for some, but Rio at least looks like it's fairly well insulated. Joseph, thanks very much.